Hello, everyone. The Liverpool.com podcast is back. I'm still your host, Mo Stewart, and I'm joined by James Martin and our own boy wonder, Keifer Macdonald, making his Liverpool.com pod debut. Now, as you can tell by my demeanour, I think everything's quite rosy in the world of Liverpool right now. Well, with one maybe exception. Sorry about this, Mo. You'll get him in March, don't worry. But yeah, Sadio's happy. We're all happy. Liverpool through to the FA Cup. We saw another new signing make his mark. But few would have predicted that anyone could upstage Luis Diaz on his debut. But I think the return of Harvey Elliott might have just done that. He came on the pitch at the same time. He brought some much-needed impetus and that goal. So we're all dead excited about Harvey. Klopp is excited about Harvey. So we're going to have a little sit-off and we're going to discuss his career to date, what the rest of this season can bring, and beyond. But Keifer, I'll start with you, since you're our new boy. Because of his age, because he's only a little lad and he's inexperienced still, it's easy to think of him as still part of the youth team. But we kind of need to leave that behind now, don't we? I mean, he has featured in every game he's been available for Liverpool first team this season. So there's no doubt he's a full member of the squad now, is there?
Yeah, 100%. Especially, in the summer months where, I think there were a lot of questions about, he came back from Blackburn, didn't he? Had a fantastic season there. And I think everyone was, is he ready yet? Is he, does he need another loan maybe at like a lesser Premier League side? Can we throw him straight into the deep end? And I think it was that Chelsea game at the back end of August, wasn't it, at Anfield? And Klopp, threw him and gave him his first start. And everyone was like, wow, and he held his own for like you say, for the game, and he was fantastic. And sadly got that injury at Leeds, but every time he's been available, like you say, he's played. And I think that's merit, credit to himself, because he's done that on merit. He hasn't been given it. He hasn't been given those minutes because people have been unavailable or whatever. We've had fully fit squads, and he's held his own. Against Thiago Alcantara, even Jordan Henderson, Naby Keita. These are £50 million players that he's keeping out of the side. And you got to think as well, it's not even his natural position. And he makes it look so easy, doesn't he? And I think, like you touched on then yesterday, the double sub of Diaz and Elliott just really lifted the place. And like you say, who would have predicted that Elliott would have outshone Diaz, so to speak? And he did that. Even before the goal, he was so impressive, wasn't he? Just getting on the ball in tight areas, moves it so quickly and with purpose as well. I think sometimes players can maybe use those kind of games when you're 1 or 2-0 up as a bit of a training session, but for him, he was like, I've missed out on 5 months, I'm back into it. And the goal itself, the technique is unbelievable. Like, I don't want to sound like some old pundit, but if Salah scores that, people are going on about that for weeks, aren't they? It's a touch to control the cross, and then the way he just sits up for him, the connection is so clean, and the cop end as well, the knee slide, the little look at the camera, it was just perfect, wasn't it? It really was. It more than made my weekend.
Trust me, we're going to be talking about it as much as if it had been Mo Salah. Don't you worry about that. I'm not going to let it lie. But Keifer makes a really important point there, James. It's not just about the fact that he's coming in and doing little bits here and there. The game needed him at that point. The impetus that he brought, the drive that he brought. Cardiff were kind of, and to be fair, some of the conditions as well helped them. They were kind of frustrating Liverpool to a certain extent. But once he came on, the ball was moved a lot quicker. Everyone looked a little bit sharper. And that's part of the point of him coming on in the games where he's not starting. He's the kind of player who will always try to bring an impact into a game, no matter what time he comes into it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know whether the changes were lined up anyway, because I think he came on with Diaz almost immediately after Liverpool had scored the opener. So whether the plan was to send him on and sort of break the deadlock, or whether it was a case of, okay, we've got the lead and now we can sort of try out the new boy and Elliott together, I guess we'll never know. But certainly he does have that in his locker, the kind of difference maker. The only problem with that theory is that he'll probably be looking for a starting berth quite soon. So he'll have to make the difference from the start. But yeah, absolutely. He did change the game. Of course, you have to factor in the fact that Liverpool had just scored, which is also going to change the game state. But yeah, the ball was getting moved around quicker. It looked as though there was more impetus in each attack. He just adds that extra element. He's a live wire, and as Keifer said, he started off on the wing, in his career, not in this game, but then to move him back deeper into that midfield role, there's always going to be that kind of extra attacking instinct when you take essentially a forward and dump him in the midfield. I mean, for a time there, Klopp had Firmino as the left-sided midfielder, Harvey Elliott as the right-sided. I don't know if we'll see that against Premier League opposition, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. And yeah, in terms of what Keith was saying about avoiding punditry cliches, I think we have to have a bit of a moratorium on them with Elliott, because you've also got the like a new signing one, which I think firmly applies. The fact that he came on with Diaz as well, it was perfect. It was like seeing two new big money buys, and yeah, they both impressed. I don't know whether I necessarily go along with upstaged. I think they both did very well. But
well, I say upstage not as a knock on Luis Diaz. I just say it as just the relentless joy that Harvey. I mean, in the post-match interview, the first question Klopp was asked was about Harvey. So from that perspective, I think it's a slightly fairer metric. But yes, we may have to have a cliche jar at some point to deal with Harvey, and so we can all have a nice little holiday at the end of the season. You mentioned starts. There is a League Cup final on the horizon. Pretty much every game Liverpool play between now and then, every single player on the pitch will be busting a gut to get into that team. Do you think he's got a chance?
Yeah, he's got a chance. I mean, of course he's got a chance. As we said in the initial discussion, we have to think of him as a member of the first team squad now. And I don't think there's anyone in that squad who'd say there's no scenario where they play the League Cup final. It is quite soon, and obviously Klopp's not going to want to rush him back. It was a serious injury. But, half an hour or so under the belt already in a competitive scenario, it's the perfect building block. And if he plays one or two more times between now and then, which you'd have to imagine he would, then yeah, he'll be in good shape to be in contention. Keifer mentioned some of the names he's up against, of course. So if he does get benched, it'll be because Klopp's picked, Champions League winner Thiago or multiple trophy winning captain Jordan Henderson in his place. So, there's no discredit to him if he doesn't quite make the starting 11 for the final. But I wouldn't rule it out. We saw against Chelsea, that Klopp really does rate him very, very highly. And it's not hard to see why when you watch him play. So, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked at all. And if he does play, I wouldn't be at all shocked if he made the difference.
No, me either. Now, the only thing with this, Keifer, is, well, two things really. One, the League Cup does allow 5 subs. So you would imagine that there will be a lot of change within that game. And also the rearranged fixture against Leeds United at home is, I think, 4 days beforehand. So is there maybe a more scope for him starting that game as opposed to the final, perhaps?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. I mean, I think there's 5 games between now and the League Cup final, isn't there, including that one against Leeds. So, with that being at Anfield, you would expect Liverpool to have more of the ball, more naturally, and potentially be looking at breaking down quite a resolute Leeds side, or they'll try and be resolute and try and implement maybe something of a low block. They're dire at the minute, aren't they? So they're going to need points, and they're not going to fancy themselves at Anfield to maybe go toe to toe with us. So you maybe think, a game like that, you might need Harvey Elliott, he's kind of attacking now, that bit of spark in the final third, which, maybe, as James said, if he doesn't start the League Cup final against Chelsea, that's no knock on his name. That's just maybe because Klopp might favour experience. It's, someone like Thiago who's been there and won it all, or, like say Jordan Henderson or, Fabinho, whoever, that, these are players who are at the pinnacle of, the game. They've won the European Cup and stuff like that. So that might be, the one factor. But then you can throw it the other way and think, as James said, when he played against Chelsea, fearless, he, almost not knowing that losing feeling is probably good for him. You can just throw him in and just, play his game kind of thing. So it will be interesting. Like James said, there's a lot of football to be played between now and the end of February. So you'd imagine he'd get, a few starts and, a hell of a lot of minutes, which is exactly what he needs. I think, if it was one game a week, maybe, it'd probably be quite hard for him to get a rhythm going. But like you say, you've got another game on Thursday, you've got one on Sunday, and you've got Milan on Wednesday, whenever it is. So yeah, I think we'll see maybe in the next kind of 10 days or so, if he starts a few, what kind of impact he has from the start, how he's lasting, is there any knock-on effect, in terms of his, I don't know, I'm not a sports physio, but is there any knock-on effect to his body or anything like that? So I'm sure we'll probably get a clearer picture. But in terms of ability and what he brings to the table, I think he's got as good a chance as anyone, and rightly so.
I think he's been lucky in as much as he is still young and young bones and ligaments do tend to heal a little bit quicker. So, I mean, James, the reality is when the injury happened, ironically enough, at Leeds United, we thought we might not see him again this season. That's what the initial prognosis was. It looked a bad one. So the fact that he's been back so soon, there's still 4 months of the season left. You could almost look at it from the perspective and say that from his development stage, it's almost a free hit in that respect because he wasn't necessarily expecting to have this time. But do you think because of that, he's going to set himself any particular goals beyond just trying to get as many minutes as he can? I mean, obviously he's got 1 goal now. Do you think he's going to set himself a little target perhaps?
I don't think necessarily he will. I know it's the boring answer, but I remember there was an interview with him even before he got injured, and he was talking about goals for the season. This was, I think, during pre-season, and he literally just said it's all about just trying to get as many minutes as he can. He knows the competition he's up against, and the best thing for his progression is to, just force his way into the team as much as possible. That's not an easy task, but I think he backs himself, and that's really going to be the key goal for the rest of the season, is to almost cement himself, like you say, in that discussion as this is a first team option now. Again, loath to sort of speculate in terms of physio things we don't know anything about, but I saw some interesting shouts as well in terms of he looked quite quick in the game, which is a good sign. Whether I mean, some people are saying he looked quicker. I mean, whether there's anything in that, I doubt. But the fact is he's been having to work without the ball for a long time. So those kind of physical elements of sharpness, of things like that, it looks like he's got into a position where he's got them back and down straight away. It didn't look rusty. It didn't look like a player who's been out for a long time at all. So as you say, when it's someone who we thought we might be missing for the whole season for a little while there, I agree with the free hit mentality. He's got time which no one really knew if he would have. So he'll want to score more goals, of course he will. But no, I don't think he'll necessarily have set himself a target beyond just getting on that pitch as much as he possibly can.
I tell you, if he has got quicker, I'll be inviting people to come and 2-foot me anytime. I can afford to gain a few yards of pace, I think. Now, we are still in 4 competitions here, Keifer, so he's going to have a lot of opportunities. And I feel like as the season gets to its conclusion, normally what happens is that teams are streamlined, coaches are less likely to experiment, so they're going to want their strongest 11 on the pitch as much as possible in the decisive moments. For Liverpool, I think it's slightly different this year because we are going into this crucial time with more on our plate than usual, but we also have more options than usual because, I'm touching wood here, we have less people injured, and particularly seriously injured, than we've potentially had at this stage of the season for a long time. So how much of a boost can Harvey be to Liverpool's mission to compete on all 4 fronts?
Well, he's absolutely vital, isn't he? And not just because of how good he's in midfield, but also, the fact that he's played 40 odd games on the wing for Blackburn last year. That adds another dimension to it, because you think really, you've only really got Salah, and obviously the drop off is pretty sizable between the two of them, but it's another option. If you need to take Salah off, for a couple of games, or even on 60 minutes a couple of times, because like you say, on competing on 4 fronts, you can say what you want about whether Liverpool still alive in the title race. That's another discussion. But Liverpool have got a very good chance of winning 3 trophies, a good chance as anyone. And with that, you'll need a big squad. Even in the 2 Champions League campaigns, 17-18 and 18-19, it was very much the same midfield three throughout. It was Milner, Henderson, Wijnaldum in the Kiev year. Then the following year it was Fabinho was in there, wasn't he? So these midfielders are used to playing like 3-4 times, consecutively without a break, which is good obviously in one aspect in terms of rhythm. But if you're competing on multiple fronts, like they did in the Madrid season when they got 97 points in the Premier League and got to the final of the Champions League, it's not exactly healthy. You do want a break, and I think with the squad now, especially in midfield, it's Klopp's engine room, isn't it? It's such a demanding role, and to have kind of 5, 6, 7 options, and all with something a bit different. You only have to look at Curtis Jones. He offers something different, slightly different. You look at Harvey Elliott, he offers something different. You've got Henderson, you've got Thiago, Fabinho. There's completely different combinations there depending on who you're playing, which is completely great. So yeah, Harvey Elliott, he's going to be vital. Like I said, especially as you get to that kind of latter end of the season, and it might be that, if you're playing 3 games of football in a week, you have to grind out results. So you might just need that bit of brilliance, just that something out of nothing, almost off the cuff. And, he gives me that Coutinho aura, when he picks the ball up, he can just produce something, thread a pass through, or, maybe we saw it yesterday, he was taking a lot of pop shots, wasn't he? So, if you need something like that, he's going to be vital. So it is a really exciting time to kind of see him drop into kind of, it's almost a perfect time, because you think if it was maybe 6 weeks later, it'd be like Chamberlain when he came back in the Madrid season. He came back, I think, April, and he only got a few run-ins, and he didn't get much because it was almost too risky. But now, obviously, there's so much football to be played that it's right. The best thing to do is get him out on the pitch, get the minutes back in his legs, and see where it takes him. And then, hopefully going into April and May with trophies still on the line, one in your pocket in the League Cup final, and plenty to play for.
Sounds great, doesn't it? By the way, we here at this podcast are firm believers that the title race is still open, just in case there are any doubts. Now, going beyond this season, we mentioned there the fact that obviously he was an option played up in the forward line for Blackburn, predominantly played midfield for here. He can fit into both. And I feel like there's a new breed of midfielder at Liverpool who can do both. Because I feel like you could say the same about Curtis Jones. You could potentially say the same about Fabio Carvalho, even though technically he's not a Liverpool player as yet. But these are the kind of things, Keith, that we normally see from Pep Guardiola, where his attackers could play in midfield and in the forward line. Do you have a feeling that maybe once Harvey gets older, he is going to settle in one or the other? Or do you potentially see a part of that Pepness coming into Liverpool?
I think further down the line, I think you probably will, settle into one position, and even if that's, say it is a front three, he can play on the left and the right. I don't think I'd like to think that he'd be that good in midfield and he continues development that he is a mainstay, not someone like, no disrespect, but not someone like Oxlade-Chamberlain who, maybe hasn't nailed down a position in either, the front line or the midfield. So he's kind of, thrown in between. But, as you say, having versatility and having players, like Curtis Jones, like Harvey Elliott, who can, step in, it's, especially when, as I said, that, there's such a, the way Liverpool play in the front line, the two wingers, it's so specific. So it's hard to go out and go and buy someone like I don't know, a replacement for Salah or a backup maybe, or a deputy. So if you can almost have it in house, Elliott's training with Salah, he's getting that development from the off, and if he does need to come in and do 30 minutes on the right, or do a game here and a game there, he's more than up to the task, and it doesn't completely disrupt the way that Liverpool will be playing, but. Like you say, he's only 18. So, even if it's not for another 2 or 3 years that, he nails down a midfield position, I imagine it'll be once one of, Henderson, Thiago, or one of those maybe go in 2 or 3 years that you might see him, be an ever stay in that side. But at the minute, there's absolutely no harm. I think the most important thing is just to be getting minutes, because, you only have to look at youngsters around the league. For example, Hudson-Odoi at Chelsea, he got that bad ACL, didn't he? And he's kind of struggled. He struggled to kind of get back into various managers' plans since. And he was such an exciting talent at one point, and now he's just kind of not fading away. But you'd maybe think a move would do him good, and he just wants minutes, whether that's on the wing or at wing back. So for Elliott, it's such a great dilemma to have, because he's good enough to get the minutes. It's just, where do you want him to get them? So if you can just keep blooding him and getting him in these experiences, I imagine he'll play a part next week at Milan. That's going to be some experience for him, isn't it? Playing at the San Siro at the age of 19. So, it's it's an exciting time for him. And, I think the best thing is, as you lads touched on then, he's got a free hit, not just for the next month, next 3 or 4 months, but, probably for the next couple of seasons as well. He's already achieved so much, and not that he'll rest on his laurels, but almost like, he shouldn't be breaking it. Bar Trent Alexander-Arnold and maybe Michael Owen and Stevie. How many players break into the Liverpool, break into a Liverpool side at 18, 19? Not many. It's taken Curtis Jones a bit longer. And, there's plenty of players who are late blossomers. So, yeah, he's he will find his position one day. And, I think it does maybe look like it might be midfield, just because I know James said that a few people said he might have gained a yard of pace, but I just when I kind of watch him, I maybe just think he's better centrally, and obviously just being in those areas where you need the decisive pass, or just that bit of energy, and I think long term I would like to see him in midfield.
I don't like to be the one to say it, but when we're talking like 2-3 years down the line as well, that's beyond Klopp. So you know, there'll be a new manager in, and all we're talking about sort of goes out the window. And who knows what system we'll be playing? Maybe there's a number 10. Maybe the midfielders function completely differently. Like we just have no clue. So unless he nails down a position like this is where Elliott plays within the next 2.5 seasons, then that's still something for a hypothetical future Liverpool manager to decide. I mean, by the time Klopp leaves, Elliott's still going to be in his early 20s, which is quite remarkable, really. So, in terms of his, I'm not saying it's a free hit until then, but there is a case of we might not see the Elliott that will become the one that Liverpool fans remember for hopefully years to come for a long time yet. I mean, you look at sort of really, I mean, Keifer touched on obviously some legends there, but you look at sort of early Gerrard and what that kind of player was compared to what he went on to become under different managers. I mean, really, we didn't see the kind of iconic Gerrard until maybe those Benitez years, you could say. And so, managerial changes can have such a difference on what a player turns into. And we may well see that with Elliott and whoever takes the hot seat next.
No, that is an interesting point, and you recovered it from the absolute downer of talking about Klopp leaving again. The other thing to consider is that we're hoping that in the right forward position, Mohamed Salah is still going to be there. So it may be that is the ultimate decider of where he ends up playing. But I want to talk about how he has adapted to life in the first team at such a ridiculously young age. I know we keep going on about it, but he's 14 games into his Liverpool career, but the amount of things that he's had to deal with in that time is remarkable. And his attitude is always first class. He always, I mean, every time he's in front of a camera, not only does he say the right things, but it looks like it comes natural to him to say the right things. No one's got a bad word to say about him, Keifer. But the thing I like as well is that there's a fearlessness that he shows on the pitch, but it also seems to be backed up by his willingness to learn. You see him talking to the likes of Salah and Henderson during games, very keen to develop as much as he can, absorb as much as he can. And he's also not afraid of a bit of hard work, as we've seen by him coming back from this injury so soon.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was during the pre-season when I think Linders was doing his diaries, wasn't he? And I think on one of the entries he said that Elliott had gone over to Salah and basically asked what he was eating and what he was doing in the gym. And I think Salah said something along the lines of like, you shouldn't be eating bread or something like that. And Elliott just completely cut it out of his diet. And it's that, like you say, that willingness at such a young age to kind of learn from the best. And there's no one better as a model pro than Mohamed Salah, who's obviously had his setbacks in his career. Was told he wasn't good enough by Chelsea. 8 years ago, and he's come back and he's now a Ballon d'Or contender. Like that's the ultimate comeback story. And so for Elliott to be able to learn off him is just fantastic. And like you say, he seems to back everything up with like he's almost like a seasoned pro the way he always reminds you of James Milner. And I don't know if it's because he uses like not cliches, but he's just so well spoken, isn't he? And it's like he's always like, onto the next one. Nothing's won yet. I want to get the next goal, and it's and it is refreshing to see someone like that, and at such a young age as well. But yeah, it's learning off Salah is going to do in the world of good, and like you say, hopefully Salah's there for the next 3-4 years or whatever to continue to teach Elliott. But I think Klopp touched on it yesterday in his post-match press conference, and he said, his biggest talent is his mentality. And he said that the day or 2 days after his injury, he was sadder than Elliott was, and Elliott was bouncing around the place, and he just seems to have this infectious kind of lovely character. And like you say, he went to I don't know if you saw, but Blackburn brought him out last week, didn't they, to the fans, and that's an awful lot. I understand he didn't play in front of the fans, but for a club to bring back a lone player, 6 months later is almost unheard of. Especially at such a young age. So it says just how highly he was rated there and how highly they thought of him, which is another string to his bow. So yeah, he is such a a lovely young man. That's the aura we get off him, and like you say, he's not scared to roll his sleeves up. And I think he said, I caught some of his post match yesterday, and he said, if I can recover from an injury of this nature at such a young age, then you know, it shows I can almost do anything. And that kind of, even, you know, in the depths of despair, to use, you know, he probably felt like his world came crashing down that afternoon in Leeds. But to flip that and use it as a positive, to think, well, if I can get over this, I can do anything. It's just, you know, it's a testament to who he is and probably what he'll go on to achieve. You know, you'd like to think he'll have a long career at Liverpool, and I'm sure we'll look back at this hopefully in 10 years' time or something and say, you know, that was the making of him, or, you know, you could see the signs of almost his greatness at such an early stage. The one that I always go back to was the Curtis Jones FA Cup match just before the pandemic, so January 2020. And Harvey Elliott would have been about 17 at the time, and I think it must have been 0-0 at the time. And Elliott came over to get the ball from the cop for a corner, and he in proper Gerrard-esque, he like kind of G'd everyone up like that.
Yeah.
He was 17 at the time, and I thought, like, God, imagine having like the balls to do that at, you know, such a young age, in front of the cop in a derby as well. And I was like, even at that time, not to be like I told you so, but I was like, yeah, he's going to be some player for us. He is.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like that wise head on young shoulders, and you look at him and you think about the future and what can come. And going back to what you were saying about his recovery from injury and turning it into a positive, it's interesting, James, because he'd have had quite a few people in that dressing room who could tell him all about doing exactly that. I mean, obviously Van Dijk, there's Gomez, there's even Joel Matip himself. Henderson's had injury history. Thiago's had a checkered injury history. So he's absorbing all of this from all those others all the time. And I think that when you think about what he can become as a player and all those kind of things, I think the main thing that I'm thinking of is that, as you said before, we don't know where his ceiling is. And that, to me, is the most exciting part.
Yeah, I mean, he could be... I mean, Keifer mentioned the Ballon d'Or in terms of Salah. Like, you know, a decade down the line, it could be Elliott in those discussions. I mean, it could not be. He's 18. Anything could happen. There are plenty of players who have, you know, been really promising and disappeared, but it does feel different with Elliott. It really does. I don't know whether part of it is because, you know, he's someone who the club have identified and spent money on bringing in. So that puts him in a slightly different position to your typical sort of academy graduate or whatever, in the sense that that's not to say that great players can't come out of the academy. We've seen it many times. I mean, most recently, of course, with Alexander-Arnold. But I think some academy players, they have the tendency to be more overhyped because they're just around the club anyway, and everyone's willing them on to be really, really good. Whereas Elliott is someone who the club have gone, this guy's special. We're going to go out of our way. We're going to spend fairly big money on, you know, what would have been a 16, 17-year-old at the time. I think it rises to 4.3 million potentially with add-ons from the tribunal. I think everyone is thinking that's going to look like a bargain in a few years' time.
It's already a bargain. What are you on
about? But in terms of at the time when they spent it, it's a bit like, okay, they back this guy to be something special. And yeah, I think we can all see why.
Yeah, and you make a good point. We do need to stress that he is young. And I feel like there will be some people watching this thinking, maybe even already in the comments saying, you're putting too much pressure on him. Just let him develop. Just let him grow. I agree with all of that. We don't want to put pressure on him. What we're simply doing is reacting to what he's given us. And sometimes some players, they just make you feel excited. They make you go against your best judgment. They make you want to see and they want to project all the wonderful things. So maybe he can, in 10 years, be collecting that Ballon d'Or. I hope in the next 10 years, he's going to be collecting plenty of trophies for Liverpool and maybe a few individual ones of his own as well. Keifer, James, this has been loads of fun. I really hope that we get to talk more about this kid in the future. I'm sure you all out there enjoyed it just as much as we will. We'll see you next soon.